Hi, everybody. I am Bobbi-Jo Molokken, and I am one of the counselors in Luther's counseling service. And today we are going to be talking about using our resiliency and challenging our thoughts. And so it is normal that we may have different thoughts that just are not very helpful to us, whether they might be anxious thoughts, whether they might be negative self-talk, whether they might be bad thoughts for the future. We'll talk about all those things. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Larry Long from the University of Kansas, who put some pieces of this program together that I've adapted for use. So while we are dealing with this pandemic, it is normal for folks to have a wide variety of psychological reactions. And so just some examples of that include things like fear and anxiety. I might feel anxious or worried about myself or somebody else getting COVID-19 or spreading it to others. I might feel worried about getting food or the personal supplies that I need. I might feel anxious about my future in general, and that can be very broad and cover a whole wide variety of different things. I could be experiencing things like depression and boredom, which might mean that I notice that I just have a general low mood or feel sad. I may have periods of time at home that just make me feel bored or lonely. Sometimes not having as much physical contact with others leads some people to those feelings. I might experience some anger, frustration, or irritability. For some people, having a loss of personal freedom associated with physical distancing can bring up some frustration. I may have anger, resentment towards people who have issued the physical distancing orders, or maybe people that I feel like have possibly exposed me to that if I've been out in public, or others that I might interpret as being less careful than I would like them to be. I might have some just general uncertainty about the future and how the situation will continue. And so uncertainty makes most of us really uncomfortable. And sometimes that uncertainty can then lead us to be irritable and short with others overall. Many people are experiencing various versions of grief and loss. Maybe it's grieving the loss of the semester that I had envisioned. Lots of experiences that are connected with that, with peers. I might also be grieving losses in relationships or changes in relationships. So my friendships with other students may have likely changed with the move to online learning, and I may have just noticed differences in those. For people who have experienced trauma in the past, having things happen that are outside of our control can be an activator for trauma, traumatic memories. Some people might be living in current situations that aren't feeling very safe or supportive, and so that can activate trauma. And just having an increase in anxiety in general can also bring out an increase in traumatic memories as well. Very many people are experiencing emotional overwhelm. So when we have multiple feelings at one time, we tend to feel overwhelmed. And so I might be experiencing emotions that to me seem kind of contradictory. Maybe I'm feeling both gratitude for having a safe place to be and also feeling sadness about what's happening in the world. I might feel all different kinds of things. And so when I have all those feelings, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I might have difficulty making decisions, being motivated, focusing, initiating or starting tasks. And so we can imagine how those might also cause us difficulty in being able to complete schoolwork, especially when it needs to be pretty self-led. When we hear the term social distancing, I'd like for people to think about physical distancing instead. We are certainly encouraging people to continue to stay social, but it may need to look a little bit different. And so continuing to work on finding ways that you can maintain some social contact with people that are important to you is a good thing to be working on. So where does our resiliency come in with this? So these are all some examples of different types of skills that contribute to us being resilient. Resiliency isn't something that you either have or you don't have. It's something that we can work on building with all these kind of pieces that you see in the graphic there. So this includes our ability to ask for help, working on our thinking patterns and problem solving skills. We're really going to be focusing on the thinking pattern part of that in this presentation today. So in thinking about that, there's a whole category of things that are called cognitive distortions that are used. And so what cognitive distortions are is ways that we think about what ourselves and the world around us. Sometimes they're irrational thoughts and beliefs that can lead to problems like anxiety, relationship conflicts, depression, self-esteem issues. It's when we're not able to think objectively. And there are also mental shortcuts that occur with everyone. So every single person has cognitive distortions. Some of us might just have them more strongly or more often than other people. These are some examples of different types of cognitive distortions. So all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, negative filtering, personalization, magnification. Sometimes it's called catastrophizing. These are just a handful of them. There are several more categories of cognitive distortions that exist out there, but we're just going to focus on these 5 for today. So all or nothing thinking is when we see things in black and white. And so this really doesn't allow for any middle ground. All or nothing is kind of how we look at that. And so if we apply that to exercise as an example, if I can't work out for an hour 3 times per week, what's the point of even working out? Might be one example of how that might fit. And so if we look at what the consequences of that thought is, if I believe that to be true, then that means I may not work out at all, versus maybe I can work out for an hour on one day and a half hour on 2 other days. I'm still getting 2 hours of exercise in that week versus none. And so it's often not the case that all or nothing thinking is helpful for us. There's almost always some middle ground there. Some keys to watch for with that all or nothing thinking are using words like always, never, those kind of things that are pretty limiting. Overgeneralizing is another one of the cognitive distortions. This might be where I see a pattern based upon a single event and I try to make broad conclusions with that. Again, using things like always, never, everybody, nobody. Maybe a professor is delayed in getting grades back to you, and you might make a comment like, all professors don't care about giving you timely feedback. Again, it's probably not true that all professors don't care. It may just be that that one professor is not getting things back to you in time. And so, again, the consequences, we can take that forward. If I believe that, the professors don't care about giving me feedback, I could then decide that, well, if they're not going to give me feedback on time, then I'm not going to get things done on time, which in turn would impact my grades, just as one example. Another distortion would be negative filtering. And so this is when we only pay attention to certain types of evidence. An example of this might be on a test, a professor gives you one piece of constructive criticism, even though you got an A, and you just ignore all the positive feedback. And you might say, I don't know how they could tell me that this one thing, wasn't good enough. And maybe then the consequences of that is that could lead to a whole strain of negative thinking where I start to tell myself, man, this professor doesn't like me, or they don't understand me, or the work that I'm doing is just horrible. When in fact, I still got an A. They just maybe pointed out one piece of criticism, but I'm only focusing on that negative and I'm choosing to ignore all of the positive feedback that was there. Another distortion is personalization. This is where we believe that everything others do or say is a reaction to me as a person. So let's say that my friends go to dinner without me, and I believe that they must hate me. The consequences of that is maybe I start to ignore my friends, which in turn could cause social problems for me. If we were to pause and think about that, maybe my friends went to dinner without me because they didn't know that I was free. Maybe they thought that I was busy. Maybe it was just spontaneous and the people who were in the same room decided to go together. And they didn't really even think about me at all. And that doesn't mean that they hate me. It just might mean that they just didn't think to ask me to come along. And so sometimes this personalization feels a little bit like we're being persecuted by other people, or believing that, again, that things are kind of a reaction to me. I put that person in a bad mood because of the way I looked or dressed or those kind of things. We often don't have as much power over other people as we like to believe that we do. Magnification or catastrophizing is another term for that, is kind of that blowing things out of proportion or making a mountain out of a molehill, if you prefer that. So an example of that might be, if I don't pass this test, I'm going to fail out of school and I'm going to be a failure in life. So basically, I'm taking something as one simple test and predicting my entire future based on that, and thinking of kind of the worst case scenario. So let's talk about the consequences of that. So if I have the thought of, I don't pass this test, I'm going to fail out of school, I'm just going to be a failure, I may just stay stuck with that particular line of thought. I often see that students will just kind of stay stuck in that. Then they literally start picturing themselves, living in their parents' basement for the rest of their lives, doing nothing. And so while they're just sitting there thinking about that and stressing about that, they're not studying for their test. Or because they think that they're going to be a failure, they start to believe that, and they feel like it doesn't matter what they do, whether they study or not, it's not going to help. And so also then the consequences is that it can create inaction. So the kind of overall process of how all this works together is that there's some type of a situation that happens, some kind of a trigger. Maybe in this example that they show here, maybe it's that I get criticized at work. The thoughts or those distortions are thoughts. I might tell myself that I'm not good enough. And then that may lead to some emotions, how I feel. I might feel worthless. I might feel anxious. And then we have to look at kind of that consequences part, the behavior. So what do I do? So because I'm feeling worthless or anxious, I might avoid contact with other people. I might also have some physical reactions to that. Maybe I feel tired, loss of appetite. And so we can see how that situation might play out. If I start avoiding contact with other people, I'm probably not going to feel connected with them, which is just going to reinforce that sense of I'm not good enough. But it's not necessarily because of something that I did. It's because of my belief that then led me through this whole process. And so we actually sometimes create the thing that we're most afraid of because we have that thought, which leads to an emotion and leads to a behavior that reinforces the thing that we are actually worried about. And so the process of challenging those thoughts then is when I have that thought, I need to be able to identify that. So recognize when those negative thoughts occur. So for many of us, we just aren't very conscious of the stream of thoughts that go through our mind. So the first step is really to learn to just be mindful of them. So as I'm having thoughts, just noticing them. Sometimes it's easy to start by just saying, I'm having the thought that, and then just naming whatever thought is coming through your mind. Once you've done that, then it might be kind of asking yourself, do any of these cognitive distortions fit for this? Or I might want to challenge those. So what proof do I have that this thought is accurate? So what proof do I have that I'm not good enough? What's the actual evidence of that? Somebody criticizing this one single thing doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not good enough. It may mean I just didn't do this one activity correct this one time at work. Are there other explanations? If we go back to the example about my friends going to dinner, what other explanations? That's kind of how I naturally went into that. What other explanations might there be? Maybe those friends just didn't think to ask me because I wasn't in the room at the time. Maybe they wanted to go eat Chinese food and they know that I hate that, and so they just didn't ask me. It could be anything like that. Maybe they are wanting, maybe they were just having a bad day. Again, lots of different things that could be explanations for that. Another example might be a reframe. So trying to come up with a different way to think about those thoughts. And so trying to keep them from being negative, personal, permanent, pervasive. So if we go back to a couple of those examples, it might look like, instead of, again, I kind of showed some examples as we went throughout of these, but rather than saying that person doesn't like me, again, it might be that person just chose not to invite me to dinner. It doesn't come with the same emotion then as the first statement. Another skill that we can use is called temporal distancing, which means kind of thinking about how am I going to feel about this situation with a little bit more time. So if there's a situation that arises for me, or I'm trying to make a decision, How am I feeling about this 5 weeks from now? And I picture myself where I might be in 5 weeks and what I might be thinking about at that point in my life. 5 months, 5 years from now. This one test that I'm struggling with taking today, 5 weeks from now is probably not still going to be in my mind. 5 months from now is definitely not going to be in my mind. And 5 years from now, I won't even remember that test ever happened. And so that can also be a helpful skill. As we're going through this pandemic situation, also using some different perspective taking can be helpful. Because there are a lot of unknowns, sometimes challenging the thoughts that we're having with the pandemic with evidence and with exceptions and some of those things is challenging because it's just not necessarily always there. So in those cases, using different perspectives can be a more helpful strategy to challenge our thoughts. So it might be we've been through disasters before and we've been able to recover. You can work on believing in your own personal resiliency and the resiliency of other human beings. Again, focusing on the ways that things are going more positive versus looking at just the negatives. That might mean while I feel sad and scared, at least I have a place to shelter in place. I have technology to connect with others. I'm currently in good health. And so, leading us to think a little bit more about how maybe somebody is less fortunate or privileged than ourselves. Even if we may not be in a great situation ourselves, most of us are still able to identify some things that we can feel grateful for. And so that's one of the ways that we can challenge our thinking as well. Another helpful thing is to focus on what we actually have control over and trying to focus on those things that we can control. So here is a graphic that was made by somebody that talks about the things that they cannot control and the things that they can control. So I can't control how long this is going to last, how other people are reacting, predicting what's going to happen, their actions, if they're social distancing or not. Things I can control is whether I follow the guidelines and social distance, how much social media intake I take in, finding fun things to do for myself. I can turn off the news. I can control my own kindness and grace and attitude. And so those are all basic kind of skills to be thinking about as we try to navigate a lot of challenging thoughts that might come up for us. And again, know that it's really normal to have all sorts of different thoughts. It's also normal for us to have cognitive distortions. We all do. And so the steps that we want to start to work on, if that's a new concept for you, is just being able to kind of notice when you're having those thoughts, and then to be able to see if you can apply any of those brief kind of challenging techniques to those thoughts that you might be having, depending on the circumstances, and seeing which or if any of those skills are able to help us at all in that time. Some additional coping resources around this are Therapy Assistance Online, TAO. All Luther students and employees have access to that for free. There are actually some really good exercises in there that can be helpful. The Calming Your Anxiety pathway is going to help to reinforce some of the skills that I talked about more in depth. There's just some other resources that are in this PowerPoint that can be helpful. Active Minds has compiled a list of different things related to mental health and the coronavirus. And then there's also some stuff from the CDC. If people are wanting to work with a mental health provider wherever they might be located, if a student is on campus, they can contact our office for more information. Otherwise, students, if they're in different states, might want to check with their insurance provider for a list of covered providers. If they're looking for a psychologist, specifically, psychologists can do psychological testing and assessment and diagnosis and therapy as well. They can click on that link with the American Psychological Society or Association to help find a psychologist in their area. For therapists who are just doing therapy, and that includes a variety of different professionals that are licensed to do therapy. Psychology Today has a website that can be really great at helping to find one. If people are looking for a psychiatrist, that could be somebody who could do some diagnosing as well as prescribing medications for mental health related conditions. Then again, there's a search feature with the American Psychiatric Association. And students can always email counseling@luther.edu for assistance if they want help locating a provider in their home area. Thank you very much for joining for today. I hope that everybody is doing as well as they can right now. Take good care.